Hello and welcome to another episode of Parliamentary Conversations in the Commonwealth, the CPA's podcast on all parliamentary affairs. This week we're joined by Norul Mohamed Rashid and Dr. Claudia Isabel Marquez de Abreu Lopes. Thank you both for joining me. I think it would be helpful if you could introduce yourselves, give a brief overview of your work, and then maybe talk a bit about how your work has touched on some of the themes of artificial intelligence.
Thank you very much, Oz. It's a pleasure to be part of this podcast. My name is Norul. I'm the team leader and regional policy advisor on governance, peace, and security with UN Women, Asia, and the Pacific Regional Office, and I'm based in Bangkok. So basically, I oversee UN Women's work on women, peace, and security, as well as on governance work, focusing on women's leadership and decision making. And that includes work related to opportunities and risks from a gender lens in Southeast Asia, with a focus on gender biases in artificial intelligence, which needs to be addressed before the region can fully benefit from technological developments such as discrimination, stereotyping, exclusion, and insecurity. Investments in artificial intelligence technologies is increasing in Southeast Asia. We project that artificial intelligence will add about USD 1 trillion to the GDP of Southeast Asia countries by 2030. And so the work that we do will definitely inform governments, policymakers, international organizations, civil society organizations, and the private sector to address the gaps, but also to contribute to a greater understanding of ethical and responsible AI from a gender lens.
Thank you, Hoz, for this invitation. And my name is Claudia Lopes, and I work in Kuala Lumpur at United Nations University, a Global Health Institute. So I'm a research lead, and I'm leading a portfolio of work on digital health, security, and governance. So we are not a traditional university in the sense that we have degree programs and students. We work with policymakers, we work with public health researchers, with civil society organizations, other universities, to bring evidence of what works in terms of policy design and evaluation. And you also do some capacity strengthening for decision makers who work on global health to bring, again, case studies, promising practices of AI applications to research, to analysis, with a focus on equitable and just AI.
We're here today to talk about social bias in AI, and how many of these problems would you say are hypothetical versus apparent right now, and how would you go about defining social bias in AI?
Okay, maybe I can start. Social biases is something that happens to us as human beings. So we have cognitive biases. So when we are talking about AI, we just mimic the cognitive biases that we do as humans. And some of these biases, they are already out there in the world. There are some historical biases that certain groups are discriminated. So maybe you can start distinguish the systematic error that are made by humans, that are cognitive biases, that are very well studied as heuristics or shortcuts in processing of information. And some of these shortcuts are related to incomplete or biased data. So in the same way, machines, they can also are exposed to bias that is called algorithmic bias. So bias is a problem when it leads to decisions that lead to discrimination of certain groups. And this is not only theoretical, it's real. There are very good examples nowadays of discrimination based by algorithms related to hiring, for example. So there was a study by Amazon, I think in 2014, where it was found that the hiring algorithms were discriminating against women. Why? Because it was trained on existing data sets of the employees who are majority white male. So it means that when it comes to making decisions of who to hire, the decision was made similarly to those who were already hired in the past. So it just perpetuates bias. And there are other biases related to recommendation systems, to machine translation, to large language models that trend to depict women in terms of their domestic roles and men more in terms of their careers, and also in terms of healthcare diagnostics.
Yeah, no, completely agree with Claudia, and she's brought out really relevant examples, that we are seeing as well. So we have to start by understanding that artificial intelligence is not neutral. It learns patterns from our societies. Social bias in AI is when systems reproduce or amplify discrimination based on gender, race, class, disability, migration, or status, and other identities. So, there's this famous study, a review of 133 AI systems showed that 44% exhibited gender bias, for example, by reproducing stereotypes about women's roles and capabilities that Claudia had expanded on. So it is already happening. It's not hypothetical. Emerging tools like LLM or large language models can perpetuate gender stereotypes, homophobia, and racial biases. And deepfake technology is now being weaponized against women and girls. Over 90% of deepfake content is pornographic and targets women. So who is most affected? So bias rarely affects just one identity. Women with disabilities, rural women, ethnic minorities, LGBTQI plus people, and low-income groups face what we call stacked or compounded harms when AI systems are trained on data that erase or stigmatize them. So AI doesn't invent discrimination from scratch. It is a very powerful mirror, and it amplify the inequalities already existing in our societies.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, both what you were talking about, Claudia, about some of the reasons why these biases might be cropping up, and then about that stacking effect that you were saying, Norul. Diving a little deeper then into why these biases might be appearing now, what do you think are some of the main mechanisms here? Would this be caused by unequal access to digital infrastructure, the specific data sources that these models are being trained on?
So yes, I think there are biased and incomplete data that are contributing to these biases. Most AI systems that we know of are trained on historical data, which already underrepresent women and marginalized groups, or encode sort of past discrimination in hiring, in policing, in lending and social protection. We also lack good sex disaggregated data and intersectional data, right? Especially from the global south. So models often sort of fill the gaps with assumptions that ignore women's realities. The next one is really about unequal digital access and voice. Those who are offline are underconnected. Many of them are women, informal workers, persons with disabilities, or rural communities. So they leave fewer digital traces, if you like. So their needs and their languages are missing from the training data. We also need to ask ourselves as to who builds the data. The AI workforce is still overwhelmingly male, about 70%, I think, and based in a small number of countries. So underrepresentation of women and global south experts in design and governance creates a feedback loop where blind spots in teams translate into blind spots in models. So bias in AI is not inevitable, but it is predictable when data, design, teams, and decision-making tables all exclude the same groups of people.
Thank you, Norul. I think we have said nearly everything about biases in AI, but maybe I would also clarify something, that because AI uses data and big data, all the biases are relative to characteristics of this data. So this data can be incomplete, can be biased, but there are also measurement error in this data, and this is something that I think we don't talk enough. And this is particularly relevant for healthcare, because we know that some of the typical symptoms, for example, for stroke, are male symptoms, not female symptoms. So the chest pain is a male symptom. A female symptom, it will be dizziness, it will be nausea. So we also need to understand that these data, they have even if they were complete and very well represented for different groups, ethnicities, and so on, and ages, there were still biases there. And there's also other type of biases that I think brings some hope, that is the evaluation bias. So we can evaluate the outputs of these models using metrics for fairness or for gender equality. So the problem is that the way that these models, the outputs of the models are evaluated now are more related with efficiency metrics, with accuracy. But there are also good examples, for example, for recommendation systems, that we can disaggregate the output for men and for women and see if they like the recommendations that are given. And we can just look at if the recommendation is different for men or women, and this makes a metric of equality. But then we also need to look at the fairness, because men and women are not equal, and we talk about gender equality is about taking into account the differences and preferences. So it's possible to build that into the evaluation metrics. And there's also the context where these AI tools, interventions are applied. So there's deployment bias, and this is related to also with Norul saying that has to do with, for example, mobile gender gaps. So we need to take into account not always the access that different groups have to these technologies, but also the way that they use and they trust these technologies. So there's still a lot of work to do in terms of the implementation side.
And that's why I think the rise in femtech, which examines female healthcare, understanding better females' physiological and biological needs, is just so interesting. And many of these femtech firms are headed by young women entrepreneurs.
To pick up on an earlier point you had mentioned as well, so you had talked, Claudia, about, say, employee profiles and how that might bias AI outcomes, and Norul, you had talked about the specific gender balance in a lot of these AI companies, which skews overwhelmingly male as well. Does the kind of jurisdiction in which these AI models might operate from reinforce certain biases? I'm thinking particularly about the concentration of AI models in the Western world or the global North that might lead to specific types of bias that you might not see elsewhere.
Yes, so you also raise a point that I think so far I've been talking about examples where women or certain ethnicities are discriminated, but there's also studies, a recent study with hiring algorithms that found that men of color or black men are more discriminated. And this is a totally experimental study where CVs, fake CVs of people were fed into a large language model with names that could be male or female and could signal some certain ethnicities. So discrimination affects everyone. I think that's the message maybe that we want to say, that everyone needs to be involved because it can affect us in 1 or 2 times in our lives, if not more. So yes, so I think there's an issue that we know that has to do with data colonialism, that these models, they are mainly in the global north, and let's talk mainly in the US, that are the data is processed is data from all over the world. So we are talking about these big tech companies that have these social media platforms, there's gaming, online gaming platforms, and people in some countries, they are not protected by policies and laws that consider their data to be their data. So they don't have any control and any say about the data that goes cross borders to train these algorithms that are not for their benefit, that they are for the profit of these big tech companies. So this is a huge problem nowadays. I don't know how to solve it because big tech companies, they have more and more power, and they also have more power to influence governments. So we can see, for example, the example of in Malaysia of the data centers. So who is the data centers benefiting? So there's this there's a public sentiment that maybe it will bring some benefit in terms of jobs and in terms of innovation and advancement of the tech in Malaysia, in the region. But so far, we don't see this, right? So I think we always need to weigh what is the public profit and what is the public good that these large language models and these other innovations will bring to the population. But people need to be educated about their rights, about also the ways that they can contest it and they can fight against it. And I don't think we are there yet.
Yeah, no, completely agree with Claudia. So we are indeed seeing sort of that English first, global north first model. So most of the frontier models are trained primarily on English and other dominant languages and on data sort of scraped from high income contexts. So that means what Claudia said, many Asian, Pacific, African, indigenous languages. Legal systems and social norms are really poorly represented and or distorted. There is a risk of what we call the epistemic inequality. So when knowledge from the global north dominates the training data, the model may treat Western norms as universal and frame global south realities as exceptions or risks, which can distort advice on everything from labor markets to family law. And then you talk about jurisdictional gaps, and I think this is the reality. Many global platforms operate in jurisdictions where AI and data protection rules are stronger. But their tools are deployed in countries where gender and digital rights are often quite weak. And enforcement capacity is also quite limited. And so it does expose women and girls to greater risk of surveillance, online violence, and misuse of their data. So what we have done at UN Women is that we are advocating for gender-responsive AI governance at national and regional levels, and for global South actors, including women's rights organizations, to co-create AI governance and infrastructure, not just to sort of import models wholesale as it is, right? So when almost all powerful models are built in a handful of countries and languages, we risk exporting not just software, but someone else's biases and values.
Yes, and maybe there are some good examples of also large language models from the global south. So at University of Malaya here in Kuala Lumpur, there's a LLM that is for Bahasa Malay, and there are other examples around the world. So that's also give credit to people who are making some effort to bring these other languages into AI. And I would like also to add something that I think there's also the right ways to do that. That is with participatory modeling and participatory algorithm, and where the communities, they have a say in the algorithms that they are going to use. But the way that this can be done is with red teaming. We talked about that yesterday in the conference, where at different steps of the algorithm development, the outputs and even the inputs were checked for fairness. And then if you have people from the communities who are using it do this exercise, we know that the result will be more fair. But what we don't want to do is to extract time and knowledge from these communities to, for example, just label data that can be meaningless exercises for them. So we want a true engagement and involvement in building these algorithms. And people don't need to have all the technical knowledge to understand what's going on into the black box. They just need to have a say, to have these systems with women in the loop, so they can also contribute to that with valid input.
Right. I think that kind of brings us on nicely to the next point as well. So we're two issues there. So corporate influence and the real preponderance of power with tech companies, which I think is quite critical. And then the need for the communities that are being affected to have a say in how these models are made as well. The one thing that struck me with AI is how, for say, a lot of perceived political or controversial issues, there's direct human influence through content moderation and through gatekeepers. What kind of role do you think these gatekeepers might have in contributing to some of the biases that have been brought up previously?
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent question. So human choices do shape the rules of the game, right? In almost every area of work that we do. So behind every AI system are policy teams, as you said, product managers, content moderators deciding what is safe, what is sexual, what is hate speech, often without, in our view, without a gender or intersectional lens. So there is a risk of reinforcing norms. If these gatekeepers share similar backgrounds, often male, global north, non-disabled, they may unintentionally underprotect women, racialized groups, and persons with disabilities from harm, while over-policing their speech and activism. So for example, in technology facilitated gender-based violence, or TFGBV, deepfakes, doxing, and coordinated harassment, that's still often under-detected, especially if they use cultural references in non-Latin languages, or under sanction, leaving survivors with little recourse, or forcing many women leaders or politicians to withdraw from public spaces. And so we have sort of good, reliable studies to show that, for example, in Asia and the Pacific, 60% of women parliamentarians in this region has been exposed to online attacks. And about 90% of deepfake content found online is basically non-consensual pornography, right, targeting women in particular. So we call this a governance issue, and why do we do it? Because at UN Women, we emphasize what we call governance by design, sort of governance by design principle, and that includes bias audits, human rights and gender impact assessments, participation of women's rights organizations that Claudia has spoken about, and persons with disabilities as well. And all these groups can help to shape community standards and safety tools that will prevent, I think, some of these problems that we've been talking about. And so, to conclude, the people who write the rules and label the training data are as important as the algorithms themselves, and they must reflect the diversity of the societies that artificial intelligence are designed to serve.
I think that we are all gatekeepers as users of tech and online platforms. So we have that power to decide the platforms that we consider that they are just. It's not as easy because, of course, there are social norms about using of certain platforms, and some of them are more popular, are more prevalent, but we always have a choice. And I think it's also very important to have these conversations of fact-based, of how these platforms and these tech companies, what they are doing, for example, to eliminate technology-facilitated GBV. Is there a system where we can report it? What are the results of that reporting? Because it's not only having a system to tick a box, is that are they effective in terms of mitigating these risks? Do people feel safe in the platforms, particularly women parliamentarians or journalists or women of color? So I think we have some power to turn things around, and to because if these platforms, if suddenly everyone withdraws, they don't make that profit. So we just need to be very aware of the context and the safety of different tech.
And I'm kind of thinking about this in terms of the risks of AI training on AI outputs, and that some of these social biases might compound on themselves. Is this a kind of realistic scenario, do you think?
I don't think it's unrealistic. I think it happens nowadays. So we can think that there's feedback loops where data that is already biased from AI systems can be used to feed these own systems. But I think there's also solutions for that. We know that this provokes more hallucinations. There are, for example, large language models. The models are less creative. I think the vocabulary is more limited. But there's also ways to identify through AI data that is artificial, that is syntactic data, and filtering out these data from the training data sets. So I think with AI, AI is there's always positives and negatives. There's a double-edged sword. So we can identify the issues with AI and use AI solutions to correct those issues. So I think we have problems nowadays, but we also have solutions if people are willing to identify these risks and the issues that they will bring.
Yeah, no, completely agree. We have what we call the echo chamber problem. I think this is what you're highlighting. So yes, there is a real risk of models learning from their own outputs, amplifying whatever stereotypes and gaps that were there in the first place. So Claudia mentioned about synthetic data, which is artificial data, right? It's generated to mimic real-world data. It is used to train AI models, and when real data is hard to find or scarce, they're expensive or contains privacy concerns. So the solution has to lie sort of somewhere as to why synthetic data is being used. So in our work, we look at the implications for gender and equality. So if early generations of models underrepresent, let's say, rural women or informal workers or women with disabilities, that sort of self-reinforcing training loop could make it even harder for those groups to appear accurately in search results, educational materials, or policy simulations. So what is the solution? Data quality and provenance becomes very crucial. So that's why UN Women and partners stress high quality, sex disaggregated, intersectional data sets, and robust documentation of where the training data comes from. And there are mitigation strategies that you can look for. So we advocate for periodic human review and regrounding of AI systems in real-world evidence, official gender statistics, qualitative research with women in all their diversity, and independent evaluation, not just sort of scraping the next wave of synthetic data. So if we let artificial intelligence mostly learn from artificial intelligence, we risk baking today's inequalities into tomorrow's knowledge base.
To wrap up then, I think you've both kind of outlined throughout this podcast some positive solutions that could be implemented to prevent social bias within AI, whether that be, say, femtech or monitoring and evaluation of GBV and reporting within AI models. At this conference that we're at, it's a parliamentary conference. What about the specific role of parliamentarians? How do you think they can recognize and counter this bias in their own practice? And how do you think they could facilitate responsible or safe AI regulation?
First, I think they should be advocates for inclusive and fair and gender equality for AI. So there are digital safety laws that are lacking in most of the countries, especially in the global south. I think that will be the first step. There's the gender discrimination based on AI. It's, as we have been talking, it's very general, it's very broad. So we need some technical solutions also related to impose safeguards to oversee the AI algorithms in the way that we can ensure that the outputs are not going to lead to discrimination. So we also need more public awareness of these gender biases in AI, and also people need to understand these biases, and we need more research that shows what are the negative impact of these biases in society. So we also need more funds for research on gender biases in AI. And finally, I think parliamentarians can also advocate for more gender balanced in terms of the tech development, in terms of STEM disciplines, and introduce targets for women representation in parliamentary units responsible for tech development, for AI adoption, and AI oversight.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with all of what Claudia has said. I think we need to start by ensuring that parliamentarians themselves recognize and counter bias in their own work. They should ask critical questions whenever AI is used in public policy, right? So whenever a ministry or parliament or agency proposes an AI system for anything from welfare targeting, for policing, migration, hiring, content regulation, they need to ask who is represented in the data and AI solution design. Where is the sex, age, disability disaggregated analysis? What are the risks for women and marginalized communities? And so in their own institutions, parliamentarians can push to ensure that parliamentary digital tools, websites and e-participation platforms are accessible, inclusive, and not replicating bias, right? And there are also many ways that parliamentarians can design effective policies to counter bias. What they do is, the main thing that they do is to that they can adopt gender-responsive AI and data protection laws. That's sort of the most obvious strand of work. To embed non-discrimination, gender equality, and disability inclusion explicitly into AI data and platform governance laws, in line with their own national gender equality commitments. Many countries have, high-level gender equality commitments. They can also mandate transparency, audits, and accountability, and this will require high-risk AI systems used in the public sector to undergo independent bias audits, publish clear explanation of how they work, and provide appeal mechanisms when people are harmed by automated decisions. And so, there is a need to invest not in capacity, not only in technology. And at UN Women, we do have things like UN Women AI schools, where we train policymakers to integrate gender equality into AI governance.
Great. Thank you both so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Parliamentary Conversations in the Commonwealth, the CPA's podcast. You can find out more about our work on our website at cpahq.org, or you can follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, X, or Blue Sky.